Incarceration nation. We're the largest jailers in the world. Is it working?
When I started practicing 30 years ago, a 10 or 20-year sentence was a big deal. Now, you go into any courtroom, you get 10, 20, 30 years. People are given 60 years for nothing.
Unifying factor of folks that we're locking up in this country is beyond race, beyond anything, is that we are locking up an alarming number of poor black folk, alarming number of poor Latino folk, and the white folk we're locking up are poor too. 29 people make money in the system every time someone is arrested.
There's money being made off of the blood and sweat of people that don't belong in prison.
Plus,
we have to humanize the people that we're locking up in this country. If they just become numbers and just become race groups and just become poor folks, we forget about it.
It's all next on Larry King Now. Welcome to Larry King Now. Today's topic is incarceration, about which much discussion is required. The United States is the largest jailer in the world. Is the American public safer for it, or has it gotten out of hand? Joining me today to discuss the issue, Harper. Mr. Harper is the award-winning actor and New York Times best-selling author. His latest book is Letters to an Incarcerated Brother, Encouragement, Hope, and Healing for Inmates and Their Loved Ones. Our old friend Mark Geragos, the renowned defense attorney whose celebrity clients have included Chris Brown, the late Michael Jackson, and he's co-author of a terrific book, Mistrial, an inside look at how the criminal justice system works and sometimes doesn't. Another old friend, Judge Joe Brown, he's, of course, the longtime host of his famous TV show, which ended its 15-year run earlier this year. A social activist, Joe is now considering going into politics. And with us again is Kevin Hagan. I say again because Kevin, who was incarcerated for 28 years, was released in 2011 from San Quentin, where he co-founded the IMPACT program. That stands for Incarcerated Men Putting Away Childish Things. I say again because I interviewed Kevin when he was a prisoner at San Quentin. Hill, who are you writing to?
Writing to everybody, because we hope for me, I hope the book hits home on a number of levels. Obviously, the book is for individuals who are incarcerated or soon to be released specifically. But on the bigger picture, on the bigger note, putting this issue to everyone, saying, you know, many of us are in mental prisons or in prisons not made of iron bars, particularly with regard to our system of incarceration and our mass incarceration crisis.
And what do you mean by childish things, Kevin?
Well, men have a tendency to revert back to what they know, wherever they come from, especially kids coming in, men coming from certain hoods and stuff like that, if that's the way you want to put it. They don't know how to grow out of that because nobody has been there to mentor them, to teach them how to grow from that mindset. So we try to teach the kids and men how to put away the childish things.
What were you in for?
I was in for murder robbery.
You did 28 years?
I did 28 years.
And you were rightfully convicted,
Yes,
right?
sir, I was.
Mark, the United States accounts for 25% of the world's inmates. There are more than 2.3 million inmates in our prison. Is most of that drugs?
Almost all of it is drugs or drug-related. You can sit in a superior court here in L.A. on any day and just wait for an hour and a half from 9 till 10:30 and watch the calendar. 90% of the cases are either drug cases or cases that arose out of drugs. And 80% of the customers of the courts here in California are minorities. I mean, this is not a white man's activity or club.
So, Judge, if drugs were legal, we'd have empty prisons.
No, I don't think you'd have empty ones. There's something else going on. At the top end, that percentage of the world's incarcerated population reflects the fact that as a society, we have not addressed the ordinary working man getting obsoleted by industrial technology and computerization. Archie Bunker keeps getting knocked down a notch and people drop out the bottom, and the criminal justice system deals with, these days, I guess it's been morphed into something that handles surplus labor rather than crime so much. So as long as we've got that problem, we're gonna have a lot of work in the criminal justice system. And it's all tied in. It's got to do with dysfunctional lifestyles and a lot of other things that promote this prison population. So drugs just happen to be the convenient designer crime of the month.
It's larger than that.
But it really comes down to this, and I guess this is kind of the morphing of what you're talking about, Judge. It comes down to money. or lack thereof, because the unifying factor of folks that we're locking up in this country is beyond race, beyond anything, is that we are locking up an alarming number of poor black folk, alarming number of poor Latino folk, and the white folk we're locking up are poor too. So it's poverty is the unifying issue, and lack of access to jobs and educational opportunity. And so what we see is if you ask somebody in a prison, why are you in there? They will raise their hand and say, whatever I was doing was somewhat money related, unless they were the customer of the anesthetic, which is the drug.
Well, the other thing that you've got, I mean, Sheriff Baca here in L.A. will tell you all the time, he is now in charge of the largest mental health facility, county
Twin
jail.
Towers downtown.
Yeah, we've got nothing but the mentally ill get they get criminalized, basically.
When they closed all the state hospitals, most of the state mental hospitals in California, they didn't take those guys and put them in programs anywhere, all the women. They took them and stuffed them in prison. And if you go in prison today and you look at the pill lines, they're all the way around the block. Mm-hmm. Most everybody in there is sedated. And those people don't belong there. Just like you have the guys that have drug abuse problems. You got to make programs for them, because it's a complex where there's money being made off of the blood and sweat of people that don't belong in prison, because there are a lot of guys that don't belong there.
Oh, yeah. I mean, look, there is a vested interest in law enforcement having a war on drugs. Law enforcement has a war on drugs. They get to forfeit assets. They get to beef up whatever they're doing. They get federal grants. They get out there. They bust people. They bring them in.
But drugs are a commodity that's a public wants.
Right.
Nobody grabs you and sticks a drug into you. Okay.
Right.
So if you're dealing with a public need, I've often said this, if you legalized it, you're cutting half the problem away, right?
Well, can you imagine if you just taxed marijuana in California? You wouldn't have to close down schools or anything else.
And we wouldn't even have to go to, you don't even have to go to legalization, Larry. You can go to decriminalization, because it's two different things. I mean, the legalization argument is very difficult one to win.
Getting pissed.
Judges,
It's hard to win politically, but decriminalization is different. That means you're not necessarily locking people up for a drug problem. You're looking for some other solution. It's different.
Look at it this way. If you think of labor as a commodity like wheat, corn, or cotton, when you get a glut in a commodity, price drops. This is the working wage. You don't want Timothy McVeigh coming along again and blowing up another courthouse in Oklahoma City. So when you've got a commodity glut, you do three things: store the surplus, subsidize the would-be producer, and cut back production. We put our surplus in a jail cell instead of a grain silo. The subsidy is the welfare check, and the cutting back of production is the banging out, drugging out, dropping out. Ineffective and lack of education, and they do it to themselves. They get a felony record, and they become very difficult to employ. They make the communities chaotic, so they're not politically cohesive, and they get taken out of the picture, and they serve a function for the system, because there's a lot of money to be made there.
Yes.
And a lot of things.
Breaks. Coming up, does the color of your skin put you at greater risk of getting convicted of a crime? That right after the break. We're back with our outstanding panel. Attorney General Eric Holder said in August that widespread incarceration is ineffective and unsustainable. Years ago, I interviewed the famed Dr. Carl Menninger of the Menninger Clinic in Topeka, Kansas, and he said the biggest mistake in mankind's history is prison. Prison doesn't work. You need another system. Denmark has a system where people go in, they don't get sentenced for an amount of years. They're sentenced, and when they're about to, they feel they should be released, they're released. Sometimes they let prison run as a community, where the prisoners elect a mayor, other societies. We just incarcerate. Mark, he said it's a failure.
It is a failure. Well, I think it's a failure. I was just in San Quentin 2 months ago. There's no way that you can go to San Quentin, see the most beautiful land on the planet in California, and then you go inside of that hellhole and you say to yourself, what are we doing? I mean, it's medieval when you're inside of there.
Isn't mandatory minimum sentences obsolete?
Well, one of the things you said is there used to be, in California at least, it was indeterminate. Yeah. You'd put somebody in. Yeah. If they were ready, you'd let them out. Then politicians discovered you could make a lot of hay by politicizing crime. And when they did that, then we started throwing out. I mean, when I started practicing 30 years ago, a 10 or 20-year sentence was a big deal. I mean, you had to really earn 10 or 20. Now, you go into any courtroom, you get 10, 20, 30 years. People are given 60 years for nothing.
Why is the black population out of whack with the white population percentage?
Well, you can trace it back 30 years ago. It's a confluence of a huge problem, a super typhoon, let's say. You have extreme reduction in terms of public education money and early childhood education, combined with the fact that you have a war on drugs, combined with the fact that you can literally lay graphs of incarceration rates over dropout rates city to city. I was just in Baltimore City. They have a 70% dropout rate of African-American males. They have about a 70% incarceration rate of African-Americans.
Is the system racist?
There's a disparity in sentencing, is what you would call it.
The black man gets more years than the white.
Because if Bobby in Westlake, I'm going to use one of my younger kids. If Bobby in Westlake Village steals a car, it's a joyride. If Joey in South Central Los Angeles steals a car, it's a juvenile felony for him. So he gets 5 years, Joey gets community service.
And we're one of the only countries in the world, and watch this, Larry, we're one of the only countries in the world that will lock up juvenile offenders for life. Give life sentences to a juvenile offender. There's no other country in the world that does that.
Judge, the African-American imprisonment rate is 7 times higher than the imprisonment rate of whites.
Well, that's to be expected if you get into the dynamics. There is a discrepancy in sentencing, but it's not so much race as to where you find the races economically. So one of the things we've got to do is look at what's actually happening in terms of the demographics. We've got this thing that's still residual in a large part of the country where your income depends on how many babies you have, and we're not doing anything about 10, 11, 12, 14-year-old girls starting to have the first of 7, 8, 9, 10, 14, 15 children.
Is that mostly black girls?
That's a lot of poor girls, but the bottom line is it's most noticeable in certain areas. Now, we've got a thing that's 15 years out of whack in the Memphis area where if you take African-American males between 18 and 29, out of every 11 of them in certain areas that are predominantly black, 9 of them are actually incarcerated. They're not on probation or parole, they're actually locked up. When the federal system abolished parole, that really got to be a mess.
Hell, as a black man, don't you take this personally?
No, I take it very. That's why that's why I wrote the book. When I started getting letters from men, young women in prison, it broke my heart in many ways, because in many ways, it's a type of a life sentence. You come out of prison with no education and a felony on your record, your chance of getting a job is extremely difficult. So that's why recidivism rates are so high. So I went to Kevin, for instance, and asked him to contribute to the book. I mean, we have to humanize the people that we're locking up in this country, because if they just become numbers and just become race groups and just become poor folks, we forget about it.
Once you're in prison, you're a forgotten person, right? It's goodbye, right?
Basically.
Oh, you know, it was interesting. I was in a federal courtroom in Orange County, of all places, yesterday, and there was a judge there, Judge Carter. And Judge Carter takes the position, and it was astonishing to me, that, okay, I'm going to sentence people under these sentencing guidelines, even though they're not mandatory, but when you're released from custody, every day at 7:30 a.m., and I walked in there yesterday at 7:30, he's got 30 to 100 of the people that have just been released from federal prison, and he wants to see them first, before they go to probation, before they go to supervised release. He shakes every one of their hands. He started a program where he'll have tattoo removals, and he tells them, the reason is I want to remove the tattoos from here to here so that I can get you a job. I want you to get a job because I think if I can get to you and get you acclimated within the first month, you've got a chance of not reoffending. So it's an amazing kind of a concept, but people don't want to deal with it.
Up next, life after prison, what the criminal justice system does and doesn't do to help ex-felons get back on their feet. We'll be right back. We're back. All right, Kevin, what about life after?
Well, I contributed a letter to the book. I just want to read a little excerpt of it. Be sure to surround yourself with people who help you along. If you don't know something, then ask questions. Get out of that man box, what we call Mr. BS. A lot of men are brought up with a family belief system. Men don't cry. Men don't share their feelings. We have to learn that stuff all over again. It's okay to cry. It's okay to share your feelings. It's okay to talk about it if you're overwhelmed. Don't stay stuck in that mentality, in that box. And my whole philosophy on that is you have to put the work in. You don't put the work in, it does, you know, you get locked up, you're gone for a long time. But it's up to the individual that's there that has to make the change.
Wasn't it hard to come out into a world after 28 years?
I thought it was great. It was fast-paced. I got a little I never got sidetracked, but I got scared. I had anxiety for about the first 3 months. But after that, I just got right in with everything else that was going on.
He's an example. He's a hero. In my mind, and Kevin says, look, I did something wrong. I mean, he readily admits he made a dire mistake when he was young, a tragic mistake. But that doesn't mean we need to throw away the key on him and the Kevins like him.
Why do we, Mark?
Well, the judge hit on one thing. You know, the second most powerful union in California is the Correctional Officers Union. They give the most money, next to the teachers union, and they have a prison industrial complex, for lack of a better term, that they support. And the correctional officers want to build more prisons. They want to warehouse more people because that enhances their power and their ability.
They want more members.
They want more members, and you got to have people. You have to take Joe's expression. You got to have more of the commodity to warehouse. And what did you call it? The silo.
Yeah, you put it in a jail cell instead of a grain silo. There's a lot of money here. 1996, I was running grand jury in Shelby County, and they had to check out all books and accounts, everything of government entities. And they had this thing about privatization. So
I was going to ask you about
there
that.
was the phone system, and what was going on is the scheme that the county commission came up with is $1 up front, 6% of your net. Well, I was astonished when I discovered that the net profit for the phone system was $94 million. And you're going like, this guy doesn't even have an office. He's got 3 part-time secretaries who collect the checks from the phone companies when they bill their customers. That's too much money.
The vendors at the jails. The vendors at the jails are making a fortune.
29 people make money in the system every time someone is arrested. That's 29 people along the line. And then you talk about privatization of prisons. We can go right as soon as this show's over. Anybody can get on the stock exchange and invest money. And this is what's diabolical. Literally invest money in a corporation whose profit motive is locking up more people. So we can bet and make money on locking up more people.
But you can't find employment for the people because, you know, government needs to stay out of business and they can run themselves. So what happens to Archie Bunker? Like I said before, he doesn't have a job. The American tradition, you work hard, you get ahead, you know, you're 19 years old, you're getting ready to settle down with Mary Lou, and Uncle Willie's going to get you a job in the warehouse and learn how to drive a fork trip. Well, before you can get there, Uncle Willie's been with the company for 19 years. He gets a pink slip, says, bye, sucker. You know, we got taken over by some young execs who want to be billionaires before they get 50, so we're downsizing for corporate profitability. Go find something for you to do. Screw your mortgage, sending kids to college, car note, that's your problem, not mine.
What keeps you going? When you're in prison?
Hope, my mom, my son, and just a will to right my wrong. And not everybody, I can't say that everybody had the attitude or the take on it that I did, but my thing is, I had opportunities, volunteers that came into the institution that were there, and then, wow, these people are volunteering their time, they're coming in here. You know what? They do think I have some self-worth. You know, because I don't know if every person does, but I know I went through a period of my life where I didn't have any self-worth anymore.
The good doctor, I am told, I have doctors tell me this, always care about the patient. If they lose a patient, they sometimes blame themselves. When you have someone in prison that you've represented, do you think about them a lot?
A lot.
Do you keep in touch?
A lot.
Do you
I don't
care,
know
or
that I
is it
keep
over?
It depends on who the client is, but I try to keep in touch. So they write letters. I mean, inmates have a lot of time on their hands. One of the things they do is write letters. I mean, nothing scars you to the core. People always ask me, because I do so much criminal defense, how do you sleep at night if you know somebody's guilty and you get them out? And I always say that is not my worry. My worry is when I've got somebody who I think didn't do it and they're going to get convicted. That is what I lose sleep about.
That must drive you nuts. Do you know someone now that you've defended that's in prison you know didn't do it?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
How do you walk around?
I mean, it drives you crazy. I mean, the system does not work. It has not worked for years. It's very good at processing people. It's excellent at processing people. Unfortunately, we've gotten to the point now where a lot of people feel like getting the trains running on time is more important than justice.
97+% of the people in American penitentiaries pled guilty. Less than 3% got found guilty, and 85% of those that pled confessed. But the system has gotten locked into a situation now where they don't really profit by people changing their lives. It actually serves a viable function for the overall society that is tamped down and hidden.
You know why 97% of the people
criminal activity.
Keeping them in.
In other words, you want them, not just keep them in, you want them to keep committing criminal acts.
You're kidding.
That's a set of our population, but I believe if folks understood.
Yeah, but I'm talking about the overall thing. If you back off and look at it in a political science function, and you take the entire thing, nobody connects over here with there, but there is a connection. So when you look at it, there is actually a functionality that crime serves for this system that has come to depend on.
If someone is watching this from Mars, they're going to say this is insane.
It is insane.
We'll come back with our remaining moments. We'll talk about finances in prison after this.
It's got to do with this whole thing.
Hill, in this book, which I can't wait to get at, Letters to an Incarcerated Brother, you say that the prison system is larger than the entire university system, and it costs more to send someone to jail than to go to an Ivy League college.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's bizarre.
And that's what the general public, the general U.S. public doesn't know that, because, like Mark had just said, politicians have done a great job sending one message. I'm the lock 'em up king. Rather than, if we were smarter, we'd actually be electing public officials that are smart on crime, not tough on crime.
The state, I'm here to the statistics, state and federal prison population decreased by 1.7% last year.
It's just because of the demographics. I mean, that's all it is. All you got. My father, who was a criminal prosecutor for many years, used to say, if you want to solve the crime problem, just lock up all males between the ages of 16 and 24. Crime would plummet immediately, because eventually, once you get through that age group, and as they age, crime goes down. I mean, that's just as simple as
population.
We have some social media questions. Stephen Borough, Facebook. By what percentage would the population of the prison system be decreased if marijuana were decriminalized? Do we know how many people?
I would say minimum of 15%.
Yeah, minimum.
15% are in prison.
Yeah.
Marijuana is going to be legal pretty soon. It's going to be legal.
No, it should be.
So people are in jail for smoking something that people outside are smoking all the time.
One of the reasons I never became a prosecutor, I was following my father around, who was a DA, and I was in high school, and I went to watch him at work, and he was locking up somebody, an 18-year-old kid. He was the DA. 18-year-old kid for 16 months in state prison for being in a room where marijuana was smoked. He didn't smoke it, but he was in the room. That used to be a crime, sentenced to state prison in California, progressive state.
Aren't there a lot of marijuana users at San Quentin?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
At Raymond Tubb, will the United States declare that the war on drugs is a failure and come up with a more effective policy? The war on drugs failed, right?
Right, but I agree.
We don't even know who
I agree with
it.
Joe. If you don't take a holistic view of this, you're doomed to just repeat it. It's like pushing down the gopher here, and he's going to pop his head up over there.
Okay, and see, you have to understand, a lot of what goes on officially is not for approved purposes. There is a big problem with the U.S. Embassy and State Department system, say, dealing with Mexico. A lot of the drugs and guns that come in that people get nervous about come in through the embassy. They're trying to generate on that whole thing they had with, what was it, where they had the sting that went wrong and some border patrol agents. Too Fast, Too Furious.
Right, Fast and Furious.
See, what they were trying to do is get a treaty. Treaties are ratified treaties become part of the supreme law of the land. And some people had the idea they wanted to defuse the Second Amendment by getting an appropriate treaty with Mexico, and they thought that was valuable enough.
At the end of the day, Judge,
do what
all
they
due
wanted
respect,
to
that's
do.
not the issue. The issue here is education and jobs.
Yeah, but the
education and jobs.
The issue's right, but you have to look at the whole society. We are where we are because of education and technology. But all across the spectrum, everywhere, they have made it more and more difficult for somebody to get an adequate education. Even the ones that go to university.
Because we cut out the subsidies for education, and we subsidize building prisons and warehousing more people.
People don't even get the idea how expensive it is for prisons. Most states spend somewhere between $4,800 as a low to maybe about $78,000 per student through the high school years. But if you take in all costs considered, you're running somewhere between $85,000 and about $100,000 per inmate at an institution per year. Now,
I don't mean to laugh.
that's not ridiculous.
What do you suggest to the average citizen?
There's a few things you can do immediately today. Every time you walk into a store today, whatever your regular store is, walk up to the manager and ask them how many ex-felons or ex-incarcerated individuals have they hired to work at this particular store, and encourage them and say you're going to take your business elsewhere if they won't.
Hire felons.
Hire ex-felons.
What change would you make tomorrow? You issue an edict.
I've already hired felons, whether intentionally or unintentionally. There's something to be said for that. I just because it was yesterday morning, Judge Carter's idea of bringing in people when they're released, and something as simple as tattoo removal, which I had never really thought of, but he says he has
forces them to do, or
well, it allows them to get jobs from people who are scared.
Exactly.
Because it's all economic based. I mean, people are not out committing petty crime because they like to commit petty crime. They're committing petty crime because they want to get a fix, because they're going to do this or they're going to do that.
What would you change, Keith?
Well, I deal with the drug situation, the guys that are strung out on drugs, and try to find some alternative instead of sending them to prison, and education. But what I would do would go back to the neighborhood and put some of them programs back in those schools that they've taken from them kids, that those kids need, so they don't get raised by the streets.
We're out of time, but one quick thing you change.
I'd change the child rearing strategies, and I'd also emphasize education.
Thank you all very much. We're going to do a lot more on this. Thanks to my guests, Hill Harper, Mark Geragos, Kevin Hagan, and Judge Joe Brown. Hill's book, Letters to an Incarcerated Brother, is in stores now. If you want to continue this conversation, you can find me on Twitter at King's Things. I'll see you next time.